Hey you guys, welcome back. Friday we finished Fuzzy Mud, and I know there's only 2 weeks left of school, but I am going to start a new chapter book with you, and if I don't finish it by the end of the school year, I'll just keep recording if you want to keep watching the YouTube channel until the book is done. But this book is The Wild Robot. Some of you have read this one. This one was the winner of the CCBA award for the junior chapter books for this year. Peter Brown is the author. A lot of you know that this one has a sequel, and that looks like this. It's called The Wild Robot Escapes. It's an excellent book, and I just love how Peter Brown does this. They're very readable books because they do have some illustrations, even though they're chapter books. The chapters are very short, and the font is kind of big and spread out. Anyway, if there's a picture, I'll turn this around, but when there's not, I'm going to read it this way. Chapter 1 is called The Ocean. Our story begins on the ocean, with the wind and the rain and the thunder and the lightning and the waves. A hurricane roared and raged through the night, and in the middle of the chaos, a cargo ship was sinking. Down, down, down to the ocean floor. The ship left hundreds of crates floating on the surface, but as the hurricane thrashed and swirled and knocked them around, the crates also began sinking into the depths. One after another, they were swallowed up by the waves until only 5 crates remained. By morning, the hurricane was gone. There were no clouds, no ships, and no land in sight. There was only calm water and clear skies and those 5 crates lazily bobbing along an ocean current. Days passed, and then a smudge of green appeared on the horizon. As the crates drifted closer, the soft green shapes slowly sharpened into the hard edges of a wild rocky island. The first crate rode to shore on a tumbling, rumbling wave, and then crashed against the rocks with such force that the whole thing burst apart. And this does have the picture here. Now, reader, what I haven't mentioned is that tightly packed inside of each crate was a brand new robot. The cargo ship had been transporting hundreds of them before it was swept up in the storm. Now, only 5 robots were left. Actually, only 4 were left because when that first crate crashed against the rocks, the robot inside shattered to pieces. The same thing happened to the next crate. It crashed against the rocks and robot parts flew everywhere. And then it happened to the next crate and the next. Robot limbs and torsos were flung onto ledges. A robot head splashed into a tide pool. A robot foot skittered into the waves. And then came the last crate. It followed the same path as the others, but instead of crashing against the rocks, it sloshed against the remains of the first 4 crates. Soon, more waves were heaving it up and out of the water. It soared through the air, spinning and glistening until it slammed down onto a tall shelf of rock. The crate was cracked and crumpled, but the robot inside was safe. Like I said, they're short chapters. We're already on to chapter 2, which is called The Otters. The inland's northern shore had become something of a robot gravesite. Scattered across the rocks were the broken bodies of 4 dead robots. Now, I'm going to stop and point out this author, Peter Brown, is using a tool called personification, which means he's making us feel like the robots are like people because he's talking about them being dead. In order to be able to be dead, you have to be alive first. We don't usually think of robots as being alive, but he calls them dead robots. So, They sparkled in the early morning light, and their sparkles caught the attention of some very curious creatures. A gang of sea otters was romping through the shallows when one of them noticed the sparkling objects. The otters all froze. They raised their noses to the wind, but they smelled only the sea, so they cautiously crept over to the rocks to take a closer look. The gang slowly approached a robot torso. That's the middle of your body. The biggest otter stuck out his paw and swatted at the heavy thing, and then quickly jumped back. But nothing happened, so they wriggled over to a robot hand. Another brave otter stuck out her paw and flipped the hand over. It made a lovely clinking sound on the rocks, and the otters all squeaked with delight. They spread out and they played with the robot arms and legs and feet. More hands were flipped. One of the otters discovered a robot head in a tide pool, and then they all dove in and they took turns rolling it along the bottom. And then they spotted something else. Overlooking the gravesite was the one surviving crate. Its sides were scraped and dented, and a wide gash ran across its top. The otters scampered up the rocks and they climbed onto the big box. 10 furry faces poked through the gash to see what was inside. What they saw was another brand new robot, but this robot was different from the others. It was still in one piece, and it was surrounded by spongy packing foam. The otters reached through the gash and they tore at the foam. It was so soft and squishy. They squeaked as they snatched the fluffy stuff. Shreds of it floated away on the sea breeze, and in all of the excitement, one of their little paws accidentally slapped an important little button on the back of the robot's head. Click. It took a while for the otters to realize that something was happening inside of the crate, but a moment later, they heard it. A low, whirring sound. Everyone stopped and stared, and then the robot opened her eyes. So chapter 3 is called The Robot. The robot's computer brain booted up. Her programs began coming online, and then, still packed in her crate, she automatically started to speak. Hello, I am Razum, Unit 7134, but you may call me Roz. While my robotic systems are activating, I will tell you about myself. Once fully activated, I will be able to move and communicate and learn. Simply give me a task and I will complete it. Over time, I will find better ways of completing my tasks. I will become a better robot. When I am not needed, I will stay out of the way and keep myself in good working order. Thank you for your time. I am now fully activated. That was a whole chapter. Chapter 4 is called The Robot Hatches. As you might know, robots don't really feel emotions. And again, here he is, or she is. Not the way animals do, and yet, as she sat in her crumpled crate, Roz felt something like curiosity. She was curious about the warm ball of light shining down from above. So her computer brain went to work, and she identified the light. It was the sun. The robot felt her body absorbing the sun's energy. With each passing minute, she felt more awake. When her battery was good and full, Roz looked around and realized that she was packed inside a crate. She tried to move her arms, but they were restrained by cords, so she applied more force. The motors in her arms hummed a little louder, and then the cords snapped. And then she lifted her hands and pulled apart the crate. Like a hatchling breaking from a shell, Roz climbed out into the world. Next chapter. The robot gravesite. Those otters were now hiding behind a rock, their round little heads nervously poked up, and they watched as a sparkling monster emerged from the crate. The monster slowly turned her head as she scanned the coastline. Her head turned, and it turned, and it turned all the way around, and it didn't stop turning until she was looking right at the otters. Hello, otters. My name is Roz. The robot's voice was simply too much for the skittish little creatures. The biggest otter squeaked, and then the whole gang suddenly took off. They galloped back across the robot gravesite, flopped into the ocean, and they raced through the waves just as fast as they could. Roz watched the otters go, but her eyes lingered on the sparkling objects that littered the shore. The objects looked strangely familiar. The robot swung her left leg forward, and then her right, and just like that, she was taking her very first steps. She stomped away from her crate and over the rocks and through the gravesite until she was standing above a broken robot body. She leaned in and she noticed the word Rozzum, Razum, lightly etched on the torso. She noticed the same word on all of the torsos, including her own. Roz continued exploring the gravesite until a playful little ocean wave washed over the rocks. She automatically stepped away from it, and then a bigger wave sloshed towards her, and she stepped away again, and then a gigantic wave crashed over the rocks and engulfed the entire gravesite. Heavy water pounded against her body and knocked her to the ground, and her damage sensors flared for the first time. A moment later, the wave was gone, and Roz just lay there, dripping and dented and surrounded by dead robots. Roz could feel her survival instincts, the part of her computer brain that made her want to avoid danger and take care of herself so that she could continue functioning properly. Her instincts were urging her to move away from the ocean. Now remember, she was programmed to have these instincts. It's not natural. She carefully got to her feet, and she saw that high above the shore, the land was bursting with trees and grasses and flowers. It looked lush and safe up there. It looked like a much better place for our robot. She had just one problem. To get up there, she would have to climb the sea cliffs. So chapter 6 is called The Climb. We're going to keep going. I'm going to read for about 15 minutes each time I do this. Crack, thunk, clang. Roz was having a little trouble climbing the cliffs. She had a new dent on her rear and a long scrape down her side. And she was just about to get another ding when a crab scuttled out from under a piece of driftwood. The crab looked up and immediately showed off his giant claws. Everyone was afraid of his claws, but not the robot. She just looked down and introduced herself. "Hello, crab. My name is Roz." After a brief standoff, the crab cautiously backed away, and that's when Roz noticed how easily he moved over the rocks. With his wide stance and his grippy feet, the crab could crawl up and down any rock face. So Roz decided to try out his climbing technique. She spread out her arms wide and she clamped each of her hands onto the cliffside. She jammed one foot into the crack and she lifted her other foot onto a narrow ledge, and just like that, she was climbing. Roz moved awkwardly at first. A chunk of rock crumbled in her hand and she had trouble finding footholds. But as she climbed higher, she started to get the hang of it. Seagulls squawked from their cliff nests and soared away when the robot came too close, but Roz paid them no mind. She was focused only on getting to the top. Up and up and up she went, methodically, climbing past nests and ledges and tiny trees rooted in the cracks, and before long, our robot felt the soft soil of the island beneath her feet. Whew, she made it. We have time for one more chapter. The wilderness. Animal sounds filled the forest, chirps and wing beats and rustlings in the underbrush, and then from the sea cliffs there came new sounds, heavy crunching footsteps. The forest animals fell silent, and from their hiding places they watched as a sparkling monster stomped past. But the forest was not a comfortable place for Roz. Jagged rocks and fallen trees and tangled underbrush made it difficult for her to walk. She stumbled along, struggling to keep her balance until her foot snagged and she toppled over like a piece of timber. It wasn't a bad fall. No dings, no dents, just dirt. But Roz was programmed to keep herself in good working order, and once she was back on her feet, she immediately began cleaning herself off. Her hands darted around her body, quickly brushing and picking off every speck of dirt. Only when the robot was sparkling again did she continue through the forest. Roz stumbled on until she found a patch of ground that was flat and open and carpeted with pine needles. It seemed like a safe place, and safety was all the robot really wanted, so she stood there, motionless, all perfect lines and angles set against the irregular shapes of the wilderness. Chapter 8 is very short. It's called The Pine Cones. If you stand in a forest long enough, eventually something will fall on you. And Roz had been standing in the forest long enough. A gentle wind whispered through the treetops, and then, thunk, a pine cone bounced off of her head. The robot looked down and watched the pine cone roll to a stop. It seemed harmless, so Roz went right back to doing nothing. There's that pine cone. A few hours later, a gust of wind rushed through the through the treetops, and then thunk, the robot looked down as another pine cone rolled away. And then a few hours after that, a howling wind tore through the treetops. It bent trunks and it shook branches, and then thunk, 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 the pine cones began raining down. Thunk, thunk. Roz felt something like annoyance. Thunk. She quickly scanned the area for somewhere safe from pine cones, and she spotted the perfect place when she looked up at the huge rocky shape that towered above the forest. So we're going to stop there today. Chapter 9 is called The Mountain, and we will pick up there tomorrow. All right. Have a good afternoon.